The war was over, but the galaxy was far from at peace. James, a soldier from Earth, stood alone on the ruins of a once thriving planet. The aftermath of the Galactic War was everywhere: burnt-out cities, wrecked spaceships, and the cold silence that followed the battles. The war had taken years of his life, years of death and destruction. Now, all he had left was the ruins and the memories. James had been fighting for so long that he had almost forgotten what peace felt like. He had seen things no one should ever see, felt the pain of losing friends, and watched entire worlds burn. But there was no time to think about the past now. His job was to help rebuild what was left, to patrol the galaxy, and ensure that the chaos didn't start again. But how could he rebuild when the damage was so vast? As he walked through the abandoned streets, the weight of the universe seemed to press down on him. He passed by the bodies of fallen soldiers, their armor now covered in dust. His boots crunched over the broken glass and twisted metal. His mind kept returning to the question, what now? What was left for him to do? The war had taken everything, but what was there to fight for now? It was then that he heard a faint sound, a soft rustle, almost a whisper in the air. He stopped, turning to look at the source of the noise. His hand instinctively moved to the sidearm on his hip, but he didn't draw it. It was too quiet, too still. No one was left to fight. He followed the sound, and his eyes narrowed as he spotted a small alleyway in the distance. As he approached, he saw a figure, half hidden in the shadows. It was an alien, one of the many species enslaved during the war. Her skin was a pale green, and her long silver hair shimmered even in the dim light. She was kneeling beside a broken crate, her hands shaking as she tried to gather something from the rubble. James stepped forward, making no sound. He was used to the quiet of war, to moving unnoticed, but this alien, she seemed different. She didn't notice him until he was right in front of her. Her eyes, large and dark, snapped up to meet his, filled with fear and sorrow. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me." James froze. He had heard stories about the slaves, the victims of the empire that had fallen during the war, but he had never imagined coming face to face with one. The alien woman in front of him was a stark reminder of the cruelty and suffering that had taken place during the Galactic War. She was not just a slave. She was a survivor, left to wander in the aftermath of destruction. Are you all right?" James asked, his voice softening. He wasn't sure why, but he felt compelled to help her. The woman nodded slowly, but her eyes showed the truth. She was not all right. Her clothes were torn, her body thin and weak from lack of food and care. She looked as though she had been through hell, and James felt a pang of guilt deep inside. How many had suffered like this? How many had been left to die in the aftermath? "I'm Kiri," she said, her voice trembling. "I am the last of my kind." James felt a chill run down his spine. Kiri was different, not like the others he had encountered. She was special, and he could see it in her eyes. She had endured far more than any one person should ever have to endure, and yet she was still alive. Her presence made him realize something he hadn't thought about for a long time: the possibility of hope. James didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to find someone like her. But there was something in the way she looked at him, something in the way she held herself despite everything that had happened. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know how. "You're safe now," he finally said. "I'll get you out of here." But Kiri shook her head. "There's no safety. Not for me." James frowned. "What do you mean?" I was a slave," Kiri whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was meant to serve, to be nothing more than a tool. I was kept in chains, forced to obey. But now, the Empire's gone, and I'm nothing. No one wants me." James didn't know how to respond to that. How could anyone treat another being like that? He couldn't even begin to understand the horrors Kiri had faced. And yet, here she was, standing before him. He couldn't just leave her to wander alone in the ruins. "What do you need?" James asked, kneeling down to her level. "I'll help you, whatever you need." Kiri looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and disbelief. No one had ever asked her what she needed before. No one had ever treated her like a person. She had been an object, a thing to be used and discarded. But now, this human soldier, a stranger to her, was offering her help. It was too much to take. And at once, I don't know what I need, she said softly. I don't know how to live without them telling me what to do. James didn't have all the answers. But he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her like this. He stood up and extended his hand to her. Come with me. I'll help you figure it out. You don't have to be alone anymore. For a long moment, Carrie hesitated. She had never trusted anyone before, especially not humans. But something about James, something in the way he spoke and looked at her, made her take his hand. She stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, but for the first time in years. There was a glimmer of hope. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But it was enough. It was the first step toward a future neither of them could have imagined. James and Carrie walked side by side through the desolate remains of the city. The air was thick with dust, and the once bustling streets were now empty. No one else had survived this part of the planet. The Empire had wiped out everything, leaving only scorched earth behind. For a moment, James felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. He had witnessed so much death, so much destruction, and yet, in the quiet that followed, he didn't know what to do. There were no more battles to fight, no more wars to win. All that was left was survival. As they walked, Carrie glanced around, her eyes scanning the broken buildings, the shattered glass, and the twisted remains of once beautiful structures. She had been forced to live in the shadows for so long that it was hard for her to understand what freedom truly meant. The horrors of her past were still fresh in her mind, and she wasn't sure how to adjust to a world where she wasn't just a tool to be used. She had never known a life outside of slavery, never known what it was like to make choices for herself. Carrie's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of James' voice. We're heading to a safe house, he said, his tone steady and calm. It's not much, but it's a place to rest. You can stay there for as long as you need. She nodded. But inside, she wasn't so sure. What did safe even mean now? The galaxy had been torn apart by war. There were no more clear lines between right and wrong, good and evil. In the aftermath, who could say what would happen next? I don't know how to live like this, she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what it means to be free. My whole life, I've been told what to do, where to go, how to act. Now, it's all different, and I don't understand. James stopped walking, turning to face her. His eyes softened as he looked at her, taking in the fear and confusion in her expression. He could see how deeply the past had affected her, how the chains of her former life still held her in place, even though they had been broken. You don't have to understand it all right now, James said. I'm not going to pretend that everything's going to be easy, but I'm here to help you, Carrie. You don't have to be alone in this. You can take your time. Carrie looked at him, unsure of how to respond. She had never had anyone offer her kindness without expecting something in return. Humans had been nothing more than enemies in the war, and the few humans she had known had only ever seen her as an object to be used. James, however, was different. He had saved her without asking for anything in return. He had offered her safety and a chance to rebuild, but she still didn't know if she could trust him. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore, Carrie admitted, her voice small. The Empire destroyed everything I knew. I've seen so many die. I don't know if I can ever be the same again. James nodded slowly, understanding her pain. He, too, had lost so much. The war had taken everything from him, his friends, his family, his home. There was nothing left but the endless quiet. But he was still alive, still standing. And so was Carrie. That, in itself, was something worth holding onto. I understand, he said softly. I've lost everything, too. But that doesn't mean we can't rebuild. We've both got a second chance. It's up to us to decide what we do with it. They continued walking in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The journey was long, but they eventually reached the safe house, a small, abandoned building hidden deep in the woods. It wasn't much, but it was a shelter, a place to rest. As they entered, James led Kiri to a room with a simple bed and a small table. The place smelled musty, but it was clean enough. "You can stay here," James said, motioning toward the bed. "It's not much, but it's safe. Take your time, rest. I'll check in with some other survivors tomorrow." Kiri stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do. She had never had a room to herself before. In her life as a slave, she had always shared cramped spaces with other captives. She had never known the feeling of being alone, of having a place that was hers. For a moment, she simply stood there, feeling the weight of it all. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. James nodded and stepped back. "I'll leave you to get some rest. I'll be back soon." As James left, Kiri stood by the window, staring out at the stars in the sky. The galaxy had been torn apart by war, but now, in this moment of silence, it felt like a new beginning. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore, and maybe that was enough. Hours passed as Kiri sat in the room, lost in thought. She couldn't sleep, not yet. Her mind kept drifting back to her past, the years of servitude, the endless commands, the feeling of being nothing more than an object. The scars of her past were deep, and though she wanted to forget, they were always there, waiting to resurface. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there when she heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she called, her voice still uncertain. James stepped inside, holding a small tray of food. He smiled at her, but she could see the tiredness in his eyes. It had been a long day, and there was still much to do. But he was still here, still taking care of her. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray down on the table. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." Kiri looked at the food, but she wasn't sure if she could eat. She hadn't had a proper meal in so long that the thought of eating felt strange. But as she looked at James, standing there with a kind smile on his face, she realized something. For the first time, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She didn't feel like a slave. She felt like a person, someone worthy of care and kindness. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more conviction. I'm starting to think I can do this, maybe." James sat down across from her, watching her carefully. He didn't push her. He didn't tell her what to do. He simply waited. "I'll be here for you, Kiri," he said quietly. "You're not alone. Not anymore." And for the first time since the war ended, Kiri felt a small flicker of hope. It was just a spark, but it was enough. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't walking it alone. The days passed slowly in the safe house. James and Kiri grew more accustomed to their new, quiet life, but the shadows of the past never truly left them. Kiri had spent so much time in chains, so much time under the Empire's control, that even the freedom she now had felt foreign to her. Every day was a struggle to understand what life could be outside the oppressive grip she had known for so long. James had seen the change in her, the way she looked at the stars, the way she seemed lost in thought when she thought no one was watching. He could see the deep scars the Empire had left on her, not just physical, but emotional. And though she didn't speak of it, he knew. The weight of those memories was something she carried with her constantly. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a brilliant orange, James walked outside to the small garden behind the safe house. He could see Kiri sitting by the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The silence between them had become comfortable, but it wasn't enough. He could feel that something was eating at her, something she was too afraid to say. James had fought in many battles, but none of them had been as hard as this. He had fought for survival, for honor, and for victory. But now, he fought for something far more important: healing. Kiri needed to heal, and he didn't know how to help her. He knew it wasn't just about offering her a safe place or food. She needed to find her own path forward. He just hoped he could be there for her when she did. He took a deep breath and walked inside, sitting across from her at the small wooden table. The evening light cast soft shadows across her face, and for the first time, he saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the same vulnerability he had seen in himself. After the war had ended, It was the look of someone who had lost everything and was unsure of how to move forward. "Kiri," James said gently, breaking the silence. "How are you feeling today?" Kiri didn't look at him at first. She continued staring out the window, her thoughts clearly far away. But eventually, she turned to him, and her gaze softened. There was a long pause before she spoke. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I'm not sure what to feel anymore. I was so used to being controlled. I don't know what it means to be free." James nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I get it," he said softly. "You spent your whole life being told what to do, who to be. Now that it's over, it must feel strange, like everything is out of your control." Kiri's eyes flickered with something, maybe fear, maybe sadness, before she spoke again. "I don't know how to trust anymore. Not anyone. Not even myself. I've seen so much pain, so much betrayal. I thought maybe the war would be the end of it all. But even now, after it's over, there are still people out there who want to control everything. I don't know how to live in a world like this." James leaned forward, his expression filled with empathy. He had seen the scars of war on his own soul, had felt the same loss and confusion that Kiri now carried. But what Kiri didn't know was that he, too, had felt the same way after the war. After losing so much, it had been hard for him to believe in anything good, anything real. "I don't have all the answers," he said honestly. "But I can tell you this, you don't have to face this alone. You don't have to figure it out on your own." Kiri shook her head, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. "But I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. "Without the Empire telling me what to do, I feel lost. I don't know how to live without someone controlling my every move." James felt his heart ache for her. He had always been a soldier, trained to fight and survive. But this was different. This was about healing, about rebuilding, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. "I can't tell you who you are, Kiri," he said softly, "but I know that you're more than what the Empire made you. You're not just their slave. You're not just a weapon to be used. You're a person. You have a future, a choice." Kiri looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. The weight of her past was heavy, but she was beginning to understand something. She was beginning to understand that James wasn't like the others. He didn't want to control her, didn't want to use her for his own gain. He was offering her something precious: freedom, not just in body, but in mind and heart. For the first time since she had been freed, Kiri felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she could start again. Maybe she could find her place in the world. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was uncertain, but at least she wasn't walking it alone. "I don't know how to be free," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe I can try. Maybe we can try together." James smiled, the warmth in his eyes reflecting the growing connection between them. "I'm here for you, Kiri, and I'll be here as long as you need me." The words felt like a promise that Kiri wasn't sure she could believe at first. But as the days passed and she began to trust him more, she found that the promise wasn't just empty words, it was real. James wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just someone who had saved her. He was someone who truly cared about her, someone who would stand by her no matter what. For the first time, Kiri felt like she wasn't just a survivor. She was more than that. She had a future. She had a purpose. And as the stars shone brightly above them that night, she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't alone anymore. The days in the safe house had been quiet, but the peace felt fragile. James could sense that Kiri was beginning to adjust to the freedom she had never known before. She spent time in the small garden, learning about the plants around her. Sometimes she would sit quietly by the window, her eyes watching the horizon, deep in thought. There was still so much she hadn't said about her past. But James could see the gradual change in her. Her fear was slowly being replaced by curiosity. Yet, James knew their peace wouldn't last forever. The galaxy was full of dangers, and while they had managed to avoid attention so far, there were always those who would want to exploit the vulnerable. Kiri wasn't just any survivor, she was someone with knowledge that could change the galaxy. And not everyone would want that kind of change. James had kept his promise to Kiri, offering her comfort and a safe place. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something neither of them could escape. As the days wore on, James started receiving strange messages, encrypted transmissions from various survivors who were also trying to rebuild in the chaos of the war's aftermath. One in particular caught his attention. It was a warning. They're coming for her. At first, James thought it was just a scare tactic, another desperate plea for help. But the more he read, the more he realized it was no coincidence. The message spoke of a powerful faction that was hunting down people like Kiri. The remnants of the Empire had survived, hidden away in secret corners of the galaxy, and they were willing to do anything to find those who knew their deepest secrets. Kiri was at the top of that list. James didn't waste any time. He went to Kiri and explained what he had learned. "Kiri, we need to leave now." Her face paled as he told her the news. She had never known a life without fear, and the thought of being hunted once more filled her with dread. But she also knew that there was no other choice. She had no idea what these people wanted with her, but she could already feel the danger closing in. "Who are they?" Kiri asked, her voice shaky. "What do they want from me?" James shook his head. "I don't know everything, but they're powerful and they're dangerous. They want to use you, and I won't let that happen." Kiri looked at him, her eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. She had trusted James, but now the world around them was shifting again. The Empire had fallen, but its shadows were still everywhere. She had been a slave to the Empire's will for so long, and now it seemed like she was being forced to run once again. "We can't outrun them forever," she whispered. "There's nowhere left to hide. We don't have to outrun them," James said firmly. "We just have to fight back. We'll face them together." That night, they packed what little they had and left the safe house behind. The galaxy was vast, and their journey was only beginning. James wasn't sure what they would face, but he knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. The message was clear. Danger was coming for Kiri, and he would do whatever it took to protect her. As they made their way to a nearby ship, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The universe was a vast and uncertain place, and they had only just begun to scratch the surface of what was out there. Kiri's quiet strength was something James admired, but the weight of their situation was undeniable. If they were to survive, they needed to be prepared for anything. They boarded the ship, and James set the coordinates for a distant planet known for its seclusion. It was one of the few places that didn't have a heavy Imperial presence, a place where they might be able to lay low for a while. As the ship ascended into the sky, Kiri looked out the window at the fading planet below, her heart heavy with uncertainty. "I've never been free like this before," Kiri said quietly. "I don't know what to do with all this space, all this freedom. It's overwhelming." James glanced at her, his expression softening. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. We'll take it one step at a time. We've got each other, and that's enough." For the first time in a long while, Kiri felt a small sense of comfort. James's words, simple as they were, had a calming effect on her. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who cared for her, someone who wanted to help her rebuild, not just survive. As they journeyed through the stars, the danger they had been warned about loomed larger in their minds. James kept a close watch on the ship's sensors, but for now, they were safe. They couldn't stop moving. They couldn't risk being found. But Kiri couldn't help but wonder, would they ever find peace? Or were they doomed to run forever, always hiding from those who wanted to control them? Their destination was a remote world, a place far from the chaos that had once consumed the galaxy. It was quiet, peaceful, just what they needed. As the ship touched down on the dusty surface, James felt a small sense of relief. For a moment, they were safe. For a moment, they could breathe. But they both knew that their journey was far from over. The remnants of the Empire were out there, and they would stop at nothing to find Kiri. The chase was on. The planet they landed on was far quieter than most. The kind of place where the sounds of nature seemed to wash over everything. The sky was a pale blue, the sun gently setting on the horizon. casting an orange glow across the desolate terrain. It was peaceful here, almost too peaceful. James and Kiri spent the first few days exploring their new surroundings, trying to put some distance between them and the dangers they had fled. But no matter how beautiful the landscape, both of them knew that peace was fragile, something they couldn't afford to take for granted. They had landed on a planet known for its isolation, a place where the war's scars hadn't reached. It was an ideal hiding spot, and for a time, it seemed as though they were safe. But safety in the galaxy was a rare thing, and James had learned long ago not to trust it. There was always someone hunting, always someone with an agenda. James kept a low profile, trying to stay out of sight as much as possible. He knew that if their enemies found them here, it would be over. The last thing they needed was to attract attention. Kiri, for her part, tried to adapt to her new surroundings. She spent time exploring the planet, getting used to the quiet and learning to enjoy the little things she had never experienced before, like the soft rustling of the trees or the warmth of the sun on her skin. But even as they tried to settle into their new life, the past wasn't done with them. One evening, as they sat down for a simple meal of rations, the silence between them was broken by a sharp beeping noise from the ship's control panel. James's heart skipped a beat as he stood up, walking over to the panel to check the signal. His hand moved swiftly, pressing buttons, his mind racing. Kiri watched him from the table, her own sense of unease growing. "What's wrong?" Kiri asked, standing up. "There's a ship approaching," James said, his voice tense, "and it's not one I recognize. We need to get out of here, now." Fear crept into Kiri's heart. She had been so hopeful that they were finally safe. But that hope now seemed foolish. The enemy was closing in, and there was no more running away. James grabbed his gear, securing his weapon and equipment before turning to Kiri. "We can't stay here any longer. You need to come with me. We're leaving." Kiri's legs felt heavy as she followed him out of the room and toward the ship. She had trusted that they could find peace here. But the galaxy didn't allow for peace, not for people like her. Not for them. The ship was ready to take off, but as James reached the cockpit, the sensor alarms went off again. He quickly scanned the ship's surroundings and cursed under his breath. It's not just one ship, it's a fleet. A small fleet, but it's enough to cause problems. The screen displayed several ships on their way toward the planet. They were closing in fast. James knew they couldn't outrun them, not here, not on this planet. Their only choice was to confront whatever was coming. James turned to Kiri, his expression hardening. "We'll have to face them head on." Kiri's mind raced. She didn't know how to fight. She didn't know what to do. Her life had been spent surviving under the harsh rule of the Empire. But now, with no choice left, she knew she had to trust James. She had no other option. "I'm not ready for this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to fight. I don't know how to defend myself." James placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip steady. "You don't need to know everything right now. I've got your back, Kiri. I always will." Kiri nodded, trying to steady her breath. She had never fought for anything in her life, but she knew now that she would have to. The galaxy had taken so much from her already, her home, her people, her freedom. Now, it was trying to take her life, and this time, she wasn't going to let it. James powered up the ship and took off into the sky. The ships were getting closer, and there was no time to waste as they broke through the atmosphere. The vastness of space stretched out before them. But that peace, that freedom they had hoped for, was quickly slipping away. "Hold on," James said, his hands gripping the controls tightly. "It's going to be a bumpy ride." Kiri's heart raced as the ship jolted, moving quickly to avoid the incoming fire from the enemy ships. They weren't making this easy. Every twist and turn was a fight for survival, and for the first time since their escape, Kiri felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't just running anymore. She was fighting for her life, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. James expertly maneuvered the ship, dodging blasts from the enemy fleet. But they couldn't keep running forever. The odds were against them. He knew that, and he could see the same fear in Kiri's eyes. But there was something else there, to something stronger. She was ready to fight back, She was ready to protect herself and maybe even him. "We need to make it to the asteroid field," James said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We can lose them there." But just as he said those words, a massive explosion rocked the ship. Carrie was thrown backward, hitting the wall with a painful thud. She gasped, trying to regain her balance as the ship shook violently. "Are you okay?" James shouted over the noise, looking back at her with concern. "I'm fine," Carrie gasped, gripping the seat to keep herself steady. But her thoughts were racing. The explosion had come from behind them. The enemy was closing in faster than they thought. "We have to do something," Carrie said, her voice filled with determination. "We can't just keep running." James looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. For the first time, he saw the strength in her that had always been there, buried beneath the layers of fear and doubt. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a fighter. "I need you to trust me, Carrie," James said, his tone serious. "This is going to get dangerous, but we're not backing down. We'll take the fight to them." Carrie nodded. She didn't know what she was doing, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let anyone take away the life she had just started to build. The galaxy had tried to break her once. It wasn't going to happen again. James pressed a few buttons on the control panel, and the ship's weapons system powered up. The fight was on. The new enemy, the remnants of the Empire, had no idea what they were about to face. Carrie and James were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next. The battle was far from over. James and Carrie's ship shook as it raced through the asteroid field, dodging enemy fire. The small fleet behind them was relentless, their weapons lighting up the dark expanse of space. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the ship, and every minute felt like an eternity. James was focused, his hands gripping the controls tightly, maneuvering the ship through the maze of rocks and debris. Carrie sat beside him, her mind racing. She had never imagined herself in a fight like this. Back when she had been a slave, she never even thought she would live to see freedom, let alone have the chance to defend it. But here she was, fighting for her life, fighting for her future. "Keep your eyes on the field," James shouted, snapping her out of her thoughts. Carrie looked ahead, her heart racing. The asteroid field was a vast and dangerous place, but it was their only chance to escape. The enemy ships were gaining on them, their fire powerful and precise. James was good, but even he couldn't keep dodging forever. "We need to do something," Carrie said, her voice urgent. "We can't outrun them." James's eyes flickered to the ship's readout, his expression hardening. The enemy was closing in fast, and the field was getting more crowded with every second. "I know. We need to find a way to fight back." Carrie thought for a moment, her mind working quickly. She remembered the old weapon systems James had shown her when they first boarded the ship. The ship wasn't just for running, it had offensive capabilities. But Carrie had never used anything like that before. She wasn't sure if she could. "I can help," she said, surprising herself with the words. James glanced at her, his face serious but with a hint of admiration. "Are you sure?" Carrie nodded, her grip tightening on the seat. "I've been running from my past long enough. It's time to fight back. We can't just be victims anymore." James smiled, though there was no time to speak. "All right, then, let's do it." He pressed a button, activating the ship's weapon systems. Carrie's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the interface light up. The ship's guns were powerful, designed for large battleships. But now, they were going to need to make every shot count. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she had no choice. "Target the lead ship," James ordered. "I'll handle the navigation. You focus on the weapons." Carrie's fingers hovered over the controls, her breath steadying as she focused on the target ahead. She remembered her training, the little that had been taught to her in the Empire's labs, and channeled that knowledge into action. Slowly, she began to lock onto the enemy ship, her fingers pressing the firing buttons with precision. The ship's guns roared to life. The first shot missed, but the second one hit its mark. The enemy ship's shields flickered before cracking under the force of the blast. The enemy ship swerved, attempting to regain control, but Carrie didn't let up. She fired again, and this time, The ship exploded in a burst of light. James grinned, his hand still busy guiding the ship through the asteroid field. Nice shot. Kiri couldn't help but feel a rush of pride, but there was no time to celebrate. The rest of the fleet was still pursuing them, and they were just getting started. She quickly shifted her focus to the next enemy ship, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. Keep them distracted, Kiri said, her voice steady now. I'll take care of the next one. James nodded, pushing the ship into a sharper turn, dodging incoming fire. Kiri fired again, her aim true. Another explosion rocked the space around them. They were making progress, but the remaining ships were still dangerous. Kiri could feel the pressure building, but she kept her mind focused, blocking out the fear. The next few minutes were a blur of shots and dodges, the asteroid field becoming even more chaotic. James worked in perfect sync with Kiri, his piloting skills giving her the time she needed to line up her shots. The enemy ships were falling one by one, their numbers thinning with each passing second. But then, something unexpected happened. A large ship, much larger than the others, emerged from the shadows of the field. It was different from the rest. It was heavily armored and bristled with weapons. Kiri's heart sank as she realized what it was: the flagship of the enemy fleet. They hadn't been fighting just random ships. They had been chasing after her the entire time. And now, the leader had arrived. That's trouble, James muttered. We're not going to be able to fight that one head-on. We need to make a plan. The enemy flagship fired its cannons, and the blast hit the ship with a force that sent Kiri flying out of her seat. She gasped, gripping the console to steady herself as the ship rocked violently. The shields were holding, but barely. We're not going to make it if we keep running, Kiri said, her voice tight with fear. James's mind was racing. He knew their chances were slim, but they had come this far. We're going to have to use the environment against them. Kiri looked at him, confused. What do you mean? We use the asteroids, James said, his voice filled with determination. We're going to fly through them at full speed. The enemy can't maneuver as easily as we can. If we can get close enough to the flagship, we can disable their engines and force them to stop chasing us. Kiri nodded, understanding the plan. It was risky, extremely risky, but it was their best shot. Let's do it. James pushed the ship into high gear, weaving through the asteroid field with all the speed he could muster. The flagship fired again, but James dodged the blast, narrowly missing the massive asteroid that loomed ahead. Kiri fired at the flagship's engines, but the shots bounced off the thick armor. We need to get closer, Kiri shouted. With a deep breath, James pushed the ship even harder, the control panel flashing warnings as the speed increased. The ship's engines roared as they approached the flagship, and Kiri fired one last time. This time, the shot found its mark. The flagship's engine sputtered, and its speed began to slow. James didn't hesitate. He pulled the ship into a sharp turn, flying straight for the flagship. The enemy ship tried to correct its course, but it was too late. The asteroid field was too dense, and the flagship couldn't keep up. With a final shot from Kiri, the flagship's main engines were disabled. The massive ship drifted, its weapons firing blindly as it slowed to a halt. We did it, James breathed, his voice filled with relief. Kiri leaned back in her seat, exhausted but triumphant. We're not out of danger yet, but we're one step closer. James nodded, his grip loosening on the controls as the ship slowed. They had done the impossible, together. They had faced an enemy that seemed unstoppable, and they had won. The future of the galaxy was still uncertain, but for the first time, Kiri felt hope stirring in her heart. She was free, and together with James, they would continue to fight for that freedom. This part is filled with action, focusing on the high-stakes battle and Kiri's growth as a fighter. It also strengthens the bond between her and James, showing their teamwork and determination. Let me know if you like any changes, as checked.